You're too strict. Brian lets me do what I want. And he's my real dad. That was the sentence. A single knife, twisted casually, almost thoughtlessly, as if the years I had given her were a shadow that vanished under the flicker of her biological father's smile. My name is Michael. I am 41 years old. 7 years ago, I stood at the altar with Linda, a woman whose laughter made me believe in second chances. She had a daughter, Sophie, 9 years old at the time. A quiet, fragile child, sharp-eyed and cautious, as if the world had already taught her that promises were fragile glass, easily broken. Her father, Brian, lived in another state. He wasn't dead, he wasn't sick, he wasn't even destitute. He was simply absent. A man who liked the sound of the word dad more than the weight of its responsibility. He would show up maybe once a year, twice if fortune struck, always with a camera-ready smile and gifts wrapped in glossy paper. To outsiders, it made for a perfect picture. Father and daughter reunited, a *T of love. But when the photos ended, so did his presence. He vanished into the wind, leaving nothing but his name on Sophie's birth certificate and a hollow space where her sense of stability should have been. I was the one who filled that space. I paid the rent so Linda didn't have to choose between groceries and the electric bill. I filled the pantry, kept the fridge stocked with fruit and milk, with everything Sophie liked. I drove her to school every morning, sat in traffic so she wouldn't be late. I stayed up late at night helping her with projects she had forgotten until the last minute. I patched up her scraped knees, sat beside her hospital bed when a fall from a swing broke her wrist, held her hand when she cried. Every holiday, every recital, every doctor's appointment, I was there. I bought the dresses, paid the registration fees, cheered from the bleachers when her team won and when it lost. I was the one who clapped, who encouraged, who showed up. Brian never did. In those early years, she called me Dad sometimes. The first time, she was half asleep in the car, her head resting against the window, her voice barely more than a whisper. Thanks, Dad. It shattered me and rebuilt me in the same moment. From then on, I told myself it didn't matter that I wasn't her blood. What mattered was presence. What mattered was choice. But choice is fragile when someone else can step in and take the credit without the cost. When Sophie turned 16, Brian came back. He didn't crawl, he didn't apologize, he didn't even acknowledge his absence. He arrived with the smug ease of a man who believed time forgives itself. Suddenly, there he was, the hero father, the indulgent parent, the man who had money for dinners at steakhouses and shopping bags from high-end stores. He gave her the kind of attention that doesn't demand anything in return, the kind that dazzles teenagers because it feels like freedom. I watched as her eyes lit up when he handed her a necklace, when he let her order whatever she wanted at a restaurant, when he told her she was beautiful. He hadn't been there for her braces, her flu, her first broken heart. But suddenly he was king in her eyes because he gave her the illusion of being wanted. And I was the man who told her to finish her homework. The man who reminded her to be home before midnight. The man who said no when she wanted to skip school. Who told her she wasn't ready to drive on the highway yet. Who refused to let her wear clothes that made her look older than she was. I became the villain, the obstacle. Her tone changed. Where there used to be gratitude, there was mockery. Where there used to be trust, there was defiance. Every rule I enforced became a reason to compare me to him. You're too strict. Brian lets me stay out. You don't understand me. Brian does. You're not even my real dad. Linda tried to soften it. She's a teenager, Michael. It's a phase. She'll grow out of it. But every time she said that, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Because it wasn't a phase. It was a choice. Sophie was learning that she could pit one man against the other, and she chose the one who cost her nothing. Still, I tried. God help me, I tried. I reminded myself of the nights she had curled up beside me on the couch. I reminded myself of the time she had cried into my shirt after a fight with a friend, the fabric damp with tears. I told myself that love was patient, that one day she would see the difference between the man who bought her gifts and the man who paid her tuition. But with every gift Brian gave her, my sacrifices shrank in her eyes. I could feel it, a slow erasure. She began to withdraw, speaking less to me, rolling her eyes when I offered advice, mocking me under her breath when she thought I couldn't hear. It's a strange kind of pain, to watch a child you raised begin to chip away at you piece by piece. To see them turn the key in the lock you thought you had secured, letting a ghost drift in to claim a space you had built with your own hands. Linda saw it too, but she refused to confront it. "Don't make her choose," she said one night when I tried to talk about it. "It'll only push her away more," as if I hadn't already been pushed. The truth was cruel but undeniable. I had been the scaffolding, invisible but necessary. And Brian had returned as the paint on the walls, bright, shallow, admired. One without the other collapses. But which one do people notice first? That was the beginning of the silence, the beginning of the resentment, the beginning of the truth I didn't want to face. That no matter how much I gave, no matter how many years I sacrificed, one man's blood would always matter more to her than my presence. And once that thought takes root, it never leaves. "Don't you dare call me by your last name." That was it. 6 words. Nothing more than a scream from the throat of a 16-year-old girl. But those words held the weight of 7 years of sacrifice, and they crushed me more effectively than any stone or blade could. We were in the kitchen when she said it. I don't even remember what led to it. Some trivial comment, some ordinary moment. I had called her Sophie Reynolds, the name I gave her when Linda and I married, the name she had used for years at school, on forms, in everyday life. It wasn't a name I forced on her. She had taken it willingly, naturally, as if she wanted to belong. I remember the day clearly. She was 10 years old, sitting at the dining table, carefully writing Sophie Reynolds at the top of her homework sheet. She had looked up at me with a shy grin and said, "It feels nice, Dad." Now, 6 years later, she screamed the opposite. "Don't you dare call me by your last name." Her voice cracked with rage. Linda flinched at the table. I stood there, frozen, the knife in my hand still half buried in the bread I had been slicing for dinner. I wanted to tell her what that name had cost me. The double shifts, the weekends spent working overtime to keep her in private school, the vacations I never took so she could have braces, tutors, activities. I wanted to tell her what it meant to me when she first chose it, how I had believed, foolishly, that it erased the shadow of her absent father and sealed us as a family. But I said nothing, because in that moment, her words did not invite explanation. They were final. They were not the reckless flailings of a teenager, but the sharp declaration of someone who had already chosen her loyalty. I looked at Linda. Her eyes were wide, full of fear, but her lips stayed sealed. She didn't correct Sophie, didn't demand respect, didn't remind her of what I had done. Her silence was an accomplice to the betrayal. I finished slicing the bread. I set the knife down gently, as though nothing had happened. But inside me, something irreversible had shifted. That evening, after dinner ended in silence, I went to my study. The house around me carried on. Sophie clattering dishes into the sink with unnecessary force, Linda murmuring something to calm her, but I shut the door and let their noise fade behind the wood. I sat at my desk, pulled my laptop closer, and began erasing myself from her world. The first thing I did was cancel her private tutor's payments. For years I had paid a small fortune for Sophie's academic support, math lessons, SAT prep, even a French instructor she had begged for. Brian hadn't contributed a cent. I clicked the button and just like that, the payments were gone. Next, I froze her allowance card. It had been me who transferred money onto it every Friday so she could buy clothes, eat out with friends, indulge in little luxuries. She never thanked me anymore. It was expected like oxygen. Now it would vanish, and she would learn what it meant to breathe on her father's air alone. Then I picked up her phone. I had bought it for her last Christmas, the newest model, something she had flaunted proudly in front of her friends. I unlocked it, removed the SIM card tied to my account, and left the device on her bed. A hollow shell of what it once was. I did it all calmly. There was no rage in my hands, no trembling, no hesitation, only clarity. If Sophie wanted her father's name, she could have his responsibilities too. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the computer screen lighting the darkened room, and let the silence wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt clean. Not happy, Not vindicated, just clean. That night, when Linda came to bed, she whispered, "Michael." She didn't mean it. She was angry. I turned to her, my voice steady. She meant every word, and I heard her. Linda sighed, but she didn't argue. She rolled onto her side and pretended to sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Sophie's words echo again and again. "Don't you dare call me by your last name." It wasn't just an insult. It was erasure. A declaration that I had been nothing more than a placeholder. A man she tolerated until the real father returned with gifts and laughter. The next morning, Sophie found out. She stormed into the kitchen, waving her phone. "Why isn't my data working?" I sipped my coffee without looking up. "Because I turned it off." Her mouth fell open. "What?" "Your phone. Your allowance. Your tutors. They're all your father's responsibility now. Since you're his daughter, not mine." She froze, staring at me as if I had slapped her. Her cheeks flushed red. "You can't do that." "I already did." Linda intervened, her voice trembling. "Michael, please, don't make decisions like this without talking to me." I cut her off with a glance. She made the decision for all of us. She rejected my name. She rejected me. That means she rejects what comes with me. The silence that followed was unbearable. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but not the kind born of remorse. They were tears of outrage, of a child who had always received and now faced the reality of loss. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. Linda sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. I finished my coffee and stood. "This is only the beginning," I told her. "From now on, if Brian wants to be her father, he can prove it in more than selfies and dinners." And I meant it. That was the turning point. The moment when years of sacrifice turned to stone in my chest. The moment when I realized that love without respect is not love at all, but servitude. I would never again carry the weight of someone else's child while being told I was nothing. Sophie had drawn the line with her words. I had answered with my actions. And there would be no going back. The silence came first. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that soothes after a storm. This silence was jagged. It scraped against the walls, filled every corner, made every meal feel like a funeral. Sophie stopped speaking to me altogether, her eyes burning with hatred whenever they met mine. She moved around the house like a stranger, as though my presence contaminated the air. Linda tried to bridge the gap at first. She whispered, "Michael, maybe we should reconsider. She's just a child. Maybe you could." But I cut her off. "No. She wanted her father. She'll have him." Linda's mouth tightened, her arguments collapsing before they reached her tongue. She knew I was right. She knew Brian's sudden reappearance had poisoned everything. But instead of facing that truth, she retreated into excuses, into silence, into a mother's desperate loyalty to her daughter. The consequences came quickly. Within a week, Sophie's tutor called, asking why the payments had stopped. Linda tried to cover, mumbling something about finances, but Sophie knew the truth. She stormed into the living room one evening, her voice high and sharp. "Brian says he can't cover the tutor right now. He says maybe next month. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Fail?" I looked up from my book, calm. "That's between you and your father." Her face twisted. "You're such an ass. You don't care about me at all." I closed the book, laid it gently on the table, and fixed my eyes on hers. "I cared for 7 years. You threw it away with 6 words." She stormed off, slamming her door so hard a picture fell from the hallway wall. I left it there, the frame cracked on the floor, a perfect metaphor for what our family had become. Then came the allowance. For years she had used my money to buy clothes, go out with friends, live a life she assumed was hers by right. Now, the card no longer worked. I watched as she tried to order food online one Friday night. Her face pale when the screen flashed, "Payment declined." She called Brian immediately, her voice sugar-sweet. "Dad, can you send me some money? Please? I just need." I heard the pause, the excuse. She hung up quickly, her face red with humiliation. She caught me watching her from the kitchen doorway, and her voice cracked with fury. "This is your fault. He can't help me because you stopped paying." I didn't even bother replying. I turned and walked away, leaving her to stew in the reality she had chosen. The silence deepened. Meals were unbearable. Linda and Sophie sat across from me at the table, speaking softly to each other, pretending I wasn't there. Sometimes Linda would try to rope me into the conversation, her voice brittle, but Sophie would cut her off with a glare. Eventually Linda stopped trying. Nights were worse. I would lie awake beside Linda, staring at the ceiling, her back turned to me. I could hear the tension in her breathing, the quiet sobs she tried to hide. She was caught between her husband and her daughter, and I knew which side she would choose if forced. But I wasn't asking her to choose. I was simply withdrawing. One evening, Sophie appeared in the living room, her phone clutched in her hand. "Brian says he'll try to cover my school trip, but he's not sure yet." Her voice trembled, and for a moment, I saw fear crack through her defiance. But when her eyes met mine, pride took over. "You don't care, do you? You'd rather see me humiliated." I didn't answer. I sipped my drink and stared into the darkened television screen, my reflection cold and unflinching. The truth was clear. Sophie had built her world on my back. Every trip, every class, every phone, every meal out, all of it came from me. And with a single outburst, she had severed the foundation. Brian was never going to replace it. He didn't want to. His love was cheap, built on gifts and dinners, never on sacrifice. And now Sophie was beginning to understand. Her grades slipped without the tutor. Her social life shrank without money. Friends stopped calling when she couldn't join them at the mall or the movies. Slowly, the glittering pedestal Brian had placed her on began to crumble. But I did not move to catch her. Linda grew restless. She began to plead in quiet moments. "Michael, please, she's learning. Can't you give her another chance? She's just a girl." I turned to her, my voice calm but firm. "She's not a girl anymore. She's 16. Old enough to know that words have consequences. If she wants to call me nothing, then nothing is what she will get." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "I don't even recognize you anymore." I almost laughed. She didn't recognize me because, for the first time, I was showing my true self. Not the man who bent until he broke. Not the man who poured money and love into a well with no bottom. I was showing her the man who finally understood that respect is the only currency that matters. And I had been robbed of it for too long. The silence became permanent. The house was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of what we once pretended to be. Sophie moved like a shadow. Linda hovered between us like smoke, and I sat in the center, cold and immovable. Every day, Sophie waited for me to cave. Every night, Linda hoped I would soften. But I never did, because something inside me had snapped the moment Sophie screamed those words. "Don't you dare call me by your last name." That was the knife that cut the rope I had been holding for 7 years. The rope was gone. The safety net was gone. And now Sophie was falling, learning too late that Brian was never going to catch her. The silence became her teacher, and I finally was free. The silence turned into a monument. It wasn't just a gap between words anymore. It was the constant reminder of betrayal, an echo that followed me through the halls of the house I paid for. Every slammed door, every tense dinner, every glance filled with venom from Sophie only reinforced the truth. She had cut me out, and I had let her stay gone. For a time, she still clung to the illusion of Brian. He kept taking her to dinners, to shops, to places where he could parade her like a trophy. She came home with new clothes, perfume, even a bracelet she waved in front of me as if to taunt me. "Brian bought this. Real silver. Not cheap like the things you get." I said nothing, but I watched her carefully. I knew the storm was coming, because Brian was never consistent. His money came in waves, one month extravagant, the next dry. His promises were always greater than his follow-through. "Next week," he told her when she asked for school fees. "Soon," he said when she asked about her activities. "I'll figure it out," he muttered when she hinted about college. And soon enough, the cracks began to show. Her school called Linda first. The tuition hadn't been paid for the next semester. Linda sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear, her voice shaking. "Yes, yes, I'll speak to him. There must be some mistake." But there was no mistake. I had cut the line, and Brian had no rope to throw her. Sophie screamed that night. "Why didn't you pay?" she demanded, her eyes wild. "Brian said you would cover it until he could." I cut her off with a single look. "Your father told you I had no rights. Now I have no responsibilities. Ask him." Her face crumpled. For the first time, I saw the fear crack through the anger. She knew deep down that Brian was unreliable, but pride kept her from admitting it. She stormed upstairs, and I heard her voice through the walls, begging him over the phone. Her words thick with tears. "Please, Dad, I need you. Please don't let me down." The silence after that call told me everything. He had let her down again. Weeks passed, and Sophie's world shrank. Her tutor was gone. Her allowance vanished. Her phone was nothing more than a camera with no service. She stopped going out with friends, too ashamed to admit she couldn't afford to keep up. Her clothes grew worn, her sneakers frayed, but she refused to ask me for help. Pride held her tongue, even as desperation hollowed her eyes. Linda suffered too. She pleaded with me in quiet moments, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Michael, please, can't you just cover this one bill? She's falling apart." I shook my head every time. No. She chose her father. Let him carry her. Linda cried at night, muffling her sobs into her pillow. But she didn't leave me, perhaps because she knew the truth. I was the only one keeping the roof over her head too. Then came the breaking point. Sophie burst into the kitchen one afternoon, her hair unkempt, her face streaked with tears. She threw her backpack onto the floor and screamed, "They're going to kick me out. If I don't pay by next week, I can't stay in school. Do you understand? I'll lose everything." I sat at the table, sipping my coffee slowly, deliberately. I looked at her the way a judge looks at a guilty defendant. "That's between you and Brian." She slammed her fists onto the table, shaking it so violently the mug rattled. "He won't. He doesn't have it. You know he doesn't. You're ruining my life." I leaned forward, my voice low, merciless. "No, Sophie. You ruined your life the moment you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't your father, that I had no right to give you my name. Those words have consequences. This is what they look like." She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Linda rushed to her side, holding her, whispering soft reassurances. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. We'll talk to him again." But Sophie shook her head violently. "He won't. He doesn't care." Her words rang through the room like a confession. And still I did nothing. Days later, she tried again. She came to me in the living room, her voice soft this time, trembling. "Michael, please. I didn't mean it. I was angry. I didn't know what I was saying." I closed the book in my lap and looked at her. "Yes, you did. Anger doesn't create words. It reveals them. You meant every syllable. And now you're living in the world you created." Her lips trembled. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stood, moving past her without a glance. That was the final break. From then on, she stopped asking. She stopped trying. She moved through the house like a ghost, eyes hollow, voice gone. Brian stopped visiting as frequently, perhaps ashamed, perhaps relieved. The last time he came, he stayed less than an hour, muttered excuses, and left without even a goodbye hug. Sophie didn't speak for 2 days afterward. Linda withered. She looked at me with eyes full of accusation, but she never voiced it. She knew the truth. She had watched me carry them for years. She had watched Sophie spit in my face. And she knew, even if she hated it, that I was right to let go. The house became unbearable. Silence pressed in on every wall, heavy and suffocating. Meals were eaten in near darkness. Nights were restless. Days dragged, filled with glares and unspoken words. But I felt calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't burning myself alive to keep others warm. I had drawn my line and I had stood by it. Sophie quickly realized that Brian wasn't eager to take responsibility, and her world collapsed around her. But mine finally became clear. I had fulfilled my role. I had given 7 years of presence, of sacrifice, of love. And with a single sentence, Sophie had thrown it all away. From that moment on, she would live with the choice she had made. So would Linda. So would Brian. As for me, I had nothing left to give them. And now I leave you with this. Tell me, was I wrong? Was I cruel for letting her face the weight of her own words? Or was I finally right to demand the respect that had been denied me all along? Because in this world, respect isn't free. It has a price, and I was done paying it.